In the village of Drybrook, people measured seasons by the river. When the water was full and loud, life felt secure. When it thinned into quiet streams, worry settled into conversations like dust. For generations, the land had followed predictable rhythms: rain in spring, warmth in summer, golden harvests in autumn. Even droughts, when they came, arrived gently enough to prepare for. But predictability is a fragile comfort, and comfort often blinds people to change. The summer began like any other. Fields shimmered under soft sunlight. Children ran barefoot along dirt paths. Farmers spoke casually about crop prices and rainfall estimates. The air was warm, but not alarming. No one looked at the horizon with concern. No one measured shadows. The village moved through its routines with the calm confidence of people who believed tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Except for one man. Elias Rowan had a habit that others quietly mocked. He listened to the ground. While neighbors scanned the sky for clouds, Elias pressed his palm against the soil near his home as if expecting it to speak. He paid attention to how quickly puddles vanished after rain, how the earth cracked along the edges of his garden, how the air felt just before noon when the wind stopped moving entirely. These details were invisible to most, but to him they formed patterns, subtle warnings written not in the sky, but beneath it. His home stood at the far edge of the village, close to a gentle slope where the earth rose slightly before descending into open fields. It wasn't large, nor particularly impressive, but behind it lay something unusual. A rectangular patch of land surrounded by wooden stakes and scattered tools. At first glance, it looked like an abandoned foundation. It wasn't abandoned. It was descending. Without announcement, Elias began digging. Not a shallow trench. Not a cellar for food storage. A room. The villagers noticed gradually. At first, they assumed he was expanding his basement. Then they saw the depth. Each day, the hole grew wider and deeper, its edges reinforced with stone and clay. Wooden planks lined the interior walls. A narrow staircase formed along one side, leading down into cool shadow even under midday sun. Building a cave now, someone joked while passing by. Planning to hide from the weather. Another added, "The sun's not an enemy, Elias." He responded with a polite nod and continued working. He didn't rush. He measured. He reinforced. The underground room took shape slowly, as if patience were part of its structure. Thick stones sealed the walls. Ventilation shafts rose discreetly through the soil, disguised among shrubs and tall grass. The ceiling was supported with reclaimed timber beams, what others had discarded as warped or useless. Inside, the air felt different, cooler, heavier, quiet in a way that muted footsteps and softened echoes. Children peered down the staircase with curiosity. Adults shook their heads. Some admired the craftsmanship while still questioning the purpose. The village had cellars, yes, but none like this, none so deliberate, none so deep, none positioned beneath the earth with such calculated care. Drybrook had never known extreme heat. Summer afternoons were warm but tolerable. Even the harshest days passed with open windows and shaded porches. The idea of hiding underground from the sun seemed excessive, almost theatrical. Prevention, when danger is absent, often looks like eccentricity. Elias didn't explain. Each evening, as golden light stretched across the fields, he descended into the unfinished room and sat quietly for several minutes before climbing back out. No one knew what he was measuring: temperature, silence, or simply reassurance. To observers, it looked strange. To him, it was confirmation. From the surface, the structure revealed almost nothing. A small door built into the slope. A stone-framed entrance no taller than a man's shoulders. It didn't resemble shelter. It resembled a storage nook, perhaps a wine cellar at best. Its modest exterior allowed the village to dismiss it easily. And dismissal is comfortable. The ground around Drybrook began changing before anyone acknowledged it. Grass yellowed earlier than usual. Wells dropped an inch lower each week. The breeze that once drifted through open windows became intermittent, then rare. By midday, shadows shrank faster, as if the sun had moved closer to the earth. Conversations shifted, but only slightly. It's a dry summer. Next rain will fix it. Always happens eventually. The underground room remained unfinished above ground but nearly complete below. Stone shelves lined its walls. Clay floors stayed cool even under relentless sunlight. A second ventilation shaft appeared, cleverly hidden beneath a cluster of wildflowers. Inside, the temperature remained steady, not cold, not damp, simply bearable. Above it, the village continued laughing gently at the idea. They didn't fear the heat. They feared inconvenience. One evening, Elias stood at the entrance of his underground room and looked toward the distant hills. The sky held no clouds, only a pale brightness that lingered long after sunset. The soil beneath his boots felt brittle, lighter than it should have been. He crouched, picked up a handful of earth, and let it fall through his fingers like dry sand. It wasn't the absence of rain that concerned him. It was the persistence of absence. Behind him, the small stone doorway blended into the slope, quiet, unimpressive, easy to overlook. Yet beneath it lay a space that held cool air like a secret. A space others believed unnecessary. A space built not for comfort, but for a question no one wanted to ask. Because digging into the earth isn't impressive until the sky refuses to help. The heat did not arrive with drama. It arrived with stillness. At first, it was only the wind that disappeared. Mornings in Drybrook had always carried a gentle breeze from the western hills, a quiet movement of air that rustled leaves and cooled skin without anyone noticing. When it stopped, no one marked the day. They only noticed that conversations felt heavier and shadows lingered closer to their feet. By the third day, the air itself seemed reluctant to move. Clothes clung to backs. Doors remained open, yet rooms stayed warm. Even the river lost its voice, its once lively current slipping into a slow, shallow whisper that exposed stones long hidden beneath water. People adapted the way humans always do, with small adjustments that feel temporary. Windows stayed open at night. Buckets of water were placed near doorways. Meals shifted to cooler hours. No one used the word heatwave. That word belonged to distant stories, not to Drybrook. The village had always been warm in summer, but never threatened by it. Except Elias began spending more time below ground. Each afternoon, when the sun reached its highest point, he descended into the underground room and remained there for an hour, sometimes two. From above, it looked like avoidance. From within, it felt like confirmation. The air inside remained calm, thick but breathable, the clay walls holding the day's heat outside like a barrier invisible to those who never stepped through the doorway. Children stopped laughing at the entrance. They started asking questions. Is it cooler down there? Can we see it? Why is it cold inside? Elias answered politely but briefly. He allowed them to step inside for a moment, just long enough for surprise to register on their faces before guiding them back into the sunlight. He never advertised the space. He simply maintained it, sweeping dust, adjusting ventilation shafts, checking the stone shelves for cracks as if preparing for a visitor who hadn't yet announced arrival. Above ground, the signs multiplied. Wells lowered another inch. The soil in gardens split into thin fractures. Animals searched for shade that shrank each day. Farmers began rising earlier to work before noon. Conversations grew shorter, voices slower. The heat wasn't unbearable yet, but it had gained persistence, a quality more troubling than intensity. It no longer visited. It remained. One afternoon, the village square stood nearly empty. The wooden benches that once held gossip and laughter were abandoned beneath direct sunlight. The metal handles of water pumps grew too hot to touch for long. A faint shimmer appeared above the dirt roads, bending the air in subtle waves that made distant objects blur. That was the first day someone mentioned Elias's underground room without humor. I heard it's cold down there. Stone keeps the heat out. Maybe he knew something, but curiosity alone doesn't create urgency. Not yet. The river continued shrinking. Fish swam closer to the surface where water warmed faster. Birds altered their paths, flying lower and resting more frequently along fence lines. Even insects changed their patterns, appearing at unusual hours as if the natural clock of the valley had been adjusted without warning. Elias reinforced the doorway with an additional wooden beam, not to lock it but to stabilize it. He widened one of the ventilation shafts by a few inches, allowing cooler night air to descend more efficiently. He filled ceramic containers with water and placed them along the stone shelves where evaporation would subtly lower the temperature further. To observers, these actions still looked excessive. Preparation, when consequences are unseen, always appears exaggerated. Then the night changed. For the first time in memory, darkness did not bring relief. The heat lingered after sunset, trapped beneath a sky that refused to cool. Families slept with doors wide open and blankets untouched. Children woke repeatedly, turning pillows to find cooler sides that warmed within minutes. Dogs lay on dirt floors instead of wooden porches, tongues extended, breathing slow and heavy. The village realized something simple and unsettling. The heat was not passing through. It was staying. Morning arrived without dew. Leaves that once glistened at dawn now appeared dull and brittle. The air carried no moisture, only a dry thickness that settled into lungs and made speech feel heavier. The sun rose with unusual brightness, not golden but pale white, as if filtered through glass. Elias stood at the entrance of his underground room and listened. He wasn't listening for sound. He was listening for absence, the missing breeze, the missing insects, the missing rhythm of moving air. The silence above ground felt unnatural, like a held breath that refused release. By midday, the first true concern surfaced. A farmer collapsed briefly while working his field, revived quickly but shaken. Another reported that stored vegetables spoiled faster than usual. Water barrels warmed within hours of being filled. Shade no longer guaranteed comfort. It merely softened discomfort. And still, many believed it would pass. Weather, they said, always corrected itself. Rain would return. The sky would change its mind. But the underground room remained steady. Inside, the temperature held a quiet balance. The clay walls absorbed excess warmth without surrendering it. The stone floor felt cool beneath bare feet. The air did not rush or swirl. It simply existed, undisturbed, as if the earth itself were offering a small refuge beneath the surface. One evening, two elders visited Elias without laughter, without jokes. They stepped inside the underground room and remained silent for several seconds, letting their breathing slow. Their eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through ventilation shafts, and understanding arrived not as shock, but as quiet realization. "You built this for heat," one finally said. Elias nodded once. Outside, the sky remained cloudless. The fields shimmered with invisible waves. The village stood at the edge of acknowledgement, not yet panicked, but no longer dismissive. The underground room had not become necessary, but it had stopped being strange. And when preparation stops looking foolish, it usually means the problem has already begun. The heat did not explode. Pressed. By the second week, the village of Drybrook stopped measuring time by days and began measuring it by shade. People moved from wall to wall as the sun shifted, treating shadows like temporary shelters instead of natural details. Conversations shortened not from disinterest, but from exhaustion. Words themselves felt heavy in air that refused to cool. The wells dropped again. Buckets struck the bottom faster, echoing hollow sounds that unsettled even those who tried to remain optimistic. Water that once filled containers in seconds now required patience. The river thinned to a narrow ribbon, exposing cracked stones that glowed white under direct sunlight. Then the animals began to falter. Chickens refused to leave their coops. Dogs dug shallow pits in the soil and lay inside them, seeking coolness that barely existed. Horses lowered their heads and stood motionless for long stretches, conserving energy instead of grazing. Nature was no longer adapting. It was enduring. The underground room, however, remained unchanged. Inside, the air held steady. Clay walls absorbed heat like a silent sponge. The stone floor stayed cool enough that bare feet felt relief instead of discomfort. Ceramic water jars sweated lightly, releasing faint moisture that softened the atmosphere. It wasn't cold, It was simply survivable. Above ground, the village reached its breaking point on a morning that arrived without breeze, without birds, without dew. The sky appeared pale and relentless, a flat brightness that erased depth from the horizon. By noon, metal handles burned skin. Wooden doors grew hot enough to warp slightly in their frames. That was the day the first family knocked on Elias's door without pretense. They didn't ask if the underground room was cool. They asked if they could stay. Elias stepped aside without hesitation. Inside, relief came not as excitement but as quiet breathing. The parents sat against the stone wall while their children lay on the floor, palms pressed to clay as if touching water. No one spoke for several minutes. The absence of heat felt almost sacred, a silence filled with gratitude too immediate for words. By evening, more families arrived. No announcements were made. No invitations were sent. The underground room simply became known. People approached the small stone doorway with lowered voices, not out of fear, but respect, the kind that emerges when necessity replaces pride. The room filled slowly. Elias organized space without commanding it. Water jars were shared. Ventilation shafts adjusted. Clay walls radiated steady coolness that softened flushed skin and slowed hurried breathing. Children slept against stone shelves. Elders leaned back with closed eyes, letting the air settle into their lungs. Above ground, the heat intensified. Fields shimmered like mirrors. The last shallow pools along the river evaporated by mid-afternoon. The sky remained empty of clouds, and the sun refused to soften even as evening approached. The village square, once filled with daily chatter, stood deserted, benches hot, pathways silent, shadows thin and fragile. But beneath the soil, time moved differently. The underground room did not defeat the sun. It simply outlasted it. Night fell without cooling the air above, yet below, the temperature held its quiet balance. The clay released the day's stored heat slowly, never allowing it to dominate the space. People rotated in and out respectfully, ensuring everyone had moments of relief. The room became less a shelter and more a rhythm, a cycle of endurance that allowed the village to continue functioning instead of collapsing. Days passed. The heat did not disappear overnight. It lingered, tested, pressed again. But the village no longer faced it blindly. The underground room provided not luxury, not escape, but time to rest, time to think, time to survive long enough for weather to change. When clouds finally appeared on the horizon 2 weeks later, they were greeted not with celebration but with quiet recognition. The first drops of rain struck the soil with soft, darkening marks that spread slowly across the ground. The air cooled just enough to remind everyone what relief felt like. People stepped out of Elias's underground doorway and looked at the sky as if seeing it for the first time. There were no speeches, no applause, no dramatic declarations, only handshakes, nods, and the shared understanding that preparation had carried them through something they had once dismissed. The underground room remained. From the surface, it still looked modest, a stone-framed entrance blending into the slope, easy to overlook. But beneath it lay proof that foresight is rarely loud. It does not demand attention. It waits quietly until attention becomes necessary. Drybrook returned to its routines eventually. Fields recovered, wells refilled, conversations regained their lightness. But one habit changed permanently. People began glancing at the earth as often as they looked at the sky. Because the lesson was not about hiding from heat. It was about anticipating change. Elias never claimed victory. He never reminded anyone of past jokes. He simply maintained the room, sweeping dust, checking ventilation, reinforcing stone where needed. The structure did not become a monument. It remained what it had always been, a question answered before urgency arrived. The underground room did not save the village by being deep. It saved them because someone chose to dig, before the sun refused to leave.